Hey, I'm James from Smoky Dad Barbecue, and are you new to Kamado style cooking? Or maybe you already have a Kamado, but you've been struggling to get it to perform exactly the way that you want. Well, I can take anybody from a beginner to a Kamado Pro in just 5 cooks, as I'm gonna break down the skills that you need to tackle any Kamado cook. Let's get into it. So I've put together these 5 cooks in a very specific order because they're gonna give you the skills and the confidence you need to tackle any recipe. But speaking of recipes, there's something that I talk to new grillers all the time that throws them for a loop is you lock in for your plan. Let's say you're gonna cook ribs for the long weekend. You're ready to go, you've got your game plan, you've been talking to friends, family, or maybe an online community about it, and then a day or two before the big cook is due, you watch another video or you read another recipe and it seems to contradict your game plan and you sort of get stuck. Do I listen to recipe A? Do I listen to recipe B? Why is recipe B different than recipe A? And so for each of these 5 cooks, I'm gonna go through a good, better, and a best variation that will also help you explain why some recipes and techniques go one way in a setup and maybe a completely different way in a different video for a different end result. And so depending on where you are in the spectrum, these are all going to be absolutely amazing. But if you want to take the training wheels approach, which I definitely recommend if this is your first time at it, or you want to take the training wheels off and just send it and go for big air, all the power to you. But this is all part of the learning curve. Aaron Franklin says you have to make bad barbecue before you make good barbecue. Well, today I want to fast track you to good barbecue as quickly as possible. And these 5 cooks in this order is going to give you exactly what you need. So without further ado, let's start with number 1. And if you see smoke rolling on in the background, don't worry, a little bit later on in the video, I'm going to show you a top secret preview of a video I'm going to be doing later in the summer using a brand new accessory I haven't seen in any Kamado style YouTube video before. So let's get started with number 1. So first up is chicken. So why chicken? Well, this is one of those things, if I had a time machine, I would almost want to go back and experience flavor the first time you cook on a Kamado style grill, because chicken is one of those proteins, it stands out as night and day different than things, especially if you're coming off of something like a propane grill. So not only is chicken going to be amazing, we're also going to be, no matter which of the 3 variations you go with, cooking at slightly hotter and faster temperatures. And I don't want to overuse the training wheels analogy here on a bike, but if you can stick with me for one more time on this, going faster is like riding your bike quicker. The centrifugal force holds it up. But if you try and go really slow, this is where the danger zone of falling over and off your bike and getting a skin knee exists. And the same is true on a Kamado style grill, where lower and slower temperatures can introduce a whole bunch of extra things that we might not have the skill set to overcome that yet. So whether it's our flame getting out of control and our temperature skyrocketing, or potentially the opposite is true, the fire snuffs out in the middle of the night and all of a sudden you wake up to an alarm if you have a meat probe telling you that your food is in danger of botulism because it's cooling off and going the wrong way. And then you've got the whole other set of questions that come in, like good smoke, bad smoke. So we're gonna delete all of those things and go for a nice, easy cook with a slightly hotter, faster temperatures, and we're not going to run into any of those road bumps. So for my first setup for good chicken, we're gonna do this Indirect. I've got behind me a Series 1 Big Joe and a Series 3, which comes with the deflector plates along with the slow roller. And before 2024, the slow roller used to be rated for a maximum of 500 degrees Fahrenheit, but looking on the specs online, they've been updated to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And at 300 degrees Fahrenheit for chicken, I don't get a discernible difference in terms of the result. So we're just gonna stick with our heat deflector plates here for your first cook, especially if your temperature control gets a little bit on the aggressive side. We do not want to exceed the 300 degree maximum of the slow roller accessory. We'll come back to that a little bit later on in the 5 cook series once you've got the skills dialed in a little bit. But for our first setup for a good chicken, we are going to go with a standard indirect setup. My recommendation, if you're starting and you've got questions like, I have a charcoal basket, for example, on a Series 2 or Series 3, which has these little notches. Do I set my deflector plates down on there? I also have this X-ring accessory. Where does that go and should I use that? I'm gonna recommend that you start with the X accessory ring on the bottom position of your divide and conquer rack, no matter what series, 1, 2, or 3 Kamado Joe that you are using, as this is just gonna prevent dropping hot heat deflectors. Once you get more comfortable or have a pair of high heat gloves, you'll be able to add those in and out absolutely no problem later on. But to prevent breaking a ceramic deflector plate your very first cook, by going on the X accessory, we're gonna remove all of those potential headaches so we could just focus on our chicken. For our good chicken, we're gonna go with the classic beer can chicken. Now, if you're a little bit concerned about BPAs, Cooks Illustrated did a test on this a while ago and came to the conclusion that there's nothing to be worried about by having a beer can inside of our chicken. But if this is a concern for you, Kamado Joe, along with many other companies, make third-party accessories to hold a beer can without any potential of concern of plastics. And your local grill store, or even places like Home Depot and sometimes Costco, have them. So you may need an extra accessory if you like, but given this has already been given the scientific 2 thumbs up, I choose beer can chicken for your first cook, as it's gonna add an extra element of protection just to make sure that we don't overdo anything and potentially get a dry bird. But by putting a beer can inside of our chicken, we're gonna help retain some extra moisture. I like to set our grill to 350 to a maximum of 400 degrees Fahrenheit for optimal results. I find if you go much quicker, you'll get an amazing looking skin, but still be struggling with the doneness on the inside of the chicken near the cartilage on the other side of the beer can, if you will. So by going by 350, we're gonna have enough temperature inside of our Kamado Joe to render the skin. And I'll only explain this part once versus repeating it in every single video, but we have 3 heat signatures that we are working with. We have conduction energy. So that's our food and or our grill grates touching another surface. So for example, cast iron, you think about that, you put a steak on it to sear it, that's conductive energy being transferred from the pan into whatever it is that you're searing. The same is true inside of your Kamado grill. We have our deflector plates as well as our cooking grids. They are transferring conductive energy. Next, one of the advantages of a Kamado style cooker is the radiant energy. As we get heat stored up inside of our ceramic, this is one of the reasons why Kamados can cook quicker than something like my offset style grill, where we don't have the same strength of conductive energy and radiant energy working together. And last but not least is the convection airflow. This is the smoke moving through our grill and passing over the food, which is what we want when trying to develop something like a signature Texas style bark on our brisket or pulled pork or whatever it is that we might cooking. For cook number 1, it's the crispiness of our chicken skin. By going with a low and slow temperature, like 225 to 250 with smoke, we are not going to get the crispiness on our skin, and we may struggle to render out the fat. Speaking of smoke, this is a no-fly zone for your first cook. Anything that you read is gonna say smoked chicken, but why don't you trust me and just start with the charcoal versus smoking wood. Smoking wood in too much quantity on something like chicken can lead to rubbery chicken skin. Same with spritzing with a liquid. So whether that be water or apple cider vinegar, something that we're gonna use in our later cooks, this will make your chicken skin dry and rubbery. If you do need to spray with anything, you wanna use a fat-based spray. So something like liquid butter or fake butter sold at most grocery stores will work wonderful at helping add a little bit of moisture to your skin if it's drying out. It'll crisp up nicely, but it also will not give you the downside of making our chicken rubbery. For 350 degrees, my recommended temperature, we're gonna want, if you have the control tower top, to place that on the 3rd line. And for the bottom draft door, go to a single finger. If you're saying, James, I don't have a control tower top, I have something like a daisy wheel, or I have what you're using on your Big Joe Series 1, a smokeware cap, this is an area that you could use a little extra help. I've put together a temperature guide just for this exact purpose that shows you all the common temperatures that you'll need in terms of bottom vent placement, top vent vent placement for series 1, 2, and 3 grills, as well as the Joe Jr. And this includes the daisy wheel control tower top and the smokeware cap, along with frequently asked questions in terms of my temperatures aren't coming up, or what do I need to do in this situation, or accessories like I'm using here, the rotisserie, are causing a variable. What sort of adjustments do I need to make? There's a guide on my website at smokingdadbarbecue.com that will give you all the other vent placements that you need. But for today's first cooked chicken, the correct placement for 350 degrees is 1 finger width on the bottom and line 3 on your control tower top. For our intermediate chicken, so sticking with the good, better, best, I would go with a spatchcock chicken, as this is going to give you a set of skills down the road that will be absolutely useful in many other things. And so in my 101 chicken videos, what I like to do is not only spatchcock the chicken by first removing the spine as well as the breastbone on our bird, but I also like to trim out the rib cage. And what that's going to do, a little bit of work up front, it's going to allow for nice slicing and carving the chicken all the way up until you get into the wing area. It just makes a really nice presentation. You don't need to worry about how to carve the bird. You'll be able to look like a pro in front of any friends, family, or guests. And it also gives us a more uniform cooking surface, so things cook nice and evenly, and there's no concern in terms of, is this undercooked raw on one side and completely overdone on the other side. It's going to give us a nice stable base. And as you get more advanced in other recipes, getting a little bit of that char grilled flavor on the bottom, or being able to flip your bird, opens up a whole bunch of extra fun options. If you're on the fence between, James, I see in recipes or even videos you've done spatchcock or rotisserie. I absolutely love the rotisserie, but I don't want to assume that you have it. It's one of my top 2 favorite accessories, along with the soapstone. And if I had to choose between the two, I would go with the rotisserie option. What I picked spatchcock today is it's going to give you some knife skills that'll come in really, really handy. And I don't want to assume that everybody already has a rotisserie. Moving into our advanced, if you ever get to read the book by Samin Norsat, Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, she talks about a buttermilk brine, and boy, is she on the money with this. I've done this in a number of recent videos of chicken wings, chicken thighs, and whole chickens, and it does an absolute amazing job at tenderizing the chicken and locking in some more flavor. And the way that I like to get the best result here is to do a 2-stage brine. This is why I'm putting this at the advanced or the most complicated option. And so to start this, I like a 4-hour buttermilk brine along with some Diamond Crystal kosher salt in something like a Ziploc bag or a brining bucket. And then we can take that out, rinse it dry, pat it dry, and apply our dry rub seasoning, and or even just something like a simple salt, pepper, and garlic, and put that in the refrigerator if you're doing this same day, all day, and if you have the time, overnight, as the refrigerator and the salt will work together to help dry out the skin and give us an even crispier result. But you're saying, James, that's not that complicated. Why don't we just do that for beginner as well as intermediate? We're not quite done yet, as the most amazing chicken I've ever made, no one in your family will say chicken's dry after having something like this, is to actually inject our chicken with a compound butter. So if you haven't heard compound butter, this is just where we're adding some flavor to our butter and then injecting that back into the bird. I like to focus on the breast, as that's really the driest part of the chicken compared to the thigh, where there's a little bit more intermuscular fat and fat on the skin to help keep everything nice and juicy. And so the way to do this is to melt a stick of butter along with some of your favorite herbs. So I like rosemary, thyme, along with garlic. Let that come to a gentle simmer, strain off the herbs and garlic, and then we can get to work at injecting this into our breast. You can cook everything exactly the same, but we're just going to have the added benefit of additional flavor inside of our chicken. And if you really want to go all out, you could even do something like one of our family favorite Alabama white chicken sauce and brush that on towards the end, let that glaze and give a little bit of extra flavor. That's a recipe if you're feeling super adventurous, be sure to check out on the channel. So that's cook number 1 in the books, which is focusing on a cleaner, hotter fire. Let's go into cook number 2, where we're going to do 2 stages, starting low and slow and finishing hot and fast. Okay, cook number 2 is going to teach you a few extra skills, which is changing gears mid-cook. These skills are going to come in invaluable in so many other things that you might want to do down the road, as well as talking about the variable of whatever it is that we're cooking and the finishing temperature. And nothing will help teach these two critical skills better than something like a reverse seared steak. So for a reverse seared steak, we're going to start with our good version. And to do that, we're going to set up our grill indirect at 250 degrees Fahrenheit. The vent settings to pull this off is about 1/8 of an inch inside the first line on your control tower, and also 1 finger width on the bottom draft door. This should get you with your heat deflectors and or slow roller into that 250 degree Fahrenheit. Just like before with poultry, we're gonna skip the smoking wood. Family preference here with poultry along with steak is we don't want wood smoke. We find it easily can absorb way too much smoke and quickly go from pleasant to an unpleasant experience. So I'd recommend you skip that. If anything, you'll see in other videos, I like to use herb smoke bombs. So these are just rosemary, thyme, or sage or something like that, where you have a fresh ingredient that's got the moisture to help protect that. We do little bundles and throw those into our fire on prime rib, a full New York strip, or our annual Thanksgiving turkey. These come out absolutely amazing. But I would plan for cook number 2, skip the smoking wood, and you can add some of these flourishes a little bit later on. And so for our first version of the reverse seared steak, we're gonna have our heat deflectors in, our grill set to 250 degrees, and cook that up to our second skill here, which is finishing temperature. And so I won't again repeat this everywhere else, but I want to take a minute just to talk about finishing temperature. If you can imagine your steak and your car for a second, in 2 different scenarios. If you were to merge onto the highway and go full throttle up to 65 miles an hour and then let off the gas, and there was a cop sitting waiting for you, your car would continue to pass the speed limit before it starts to slow down. The same is true with our steak. And so the hotter and faster you're cooking is the more aggressive the acceleration, and the more likely you are to overshoot that target temperature or target speed. So by going with a lower and slower temperature, like 250 degrees, we are going to completely prevent the problem of blasting way past whatever finishing temperature that you might like. As a general rule of thumb, I would budget in 10 degrees Fahrenheit gained during the rest. So if we want a medium rare steak, my go-to approach is to cook the steak to about 114 degrees Fahrenheit on the grill. Remove it. It will gain up to 10 degrees while in the rest, which will bring it up to about 124, 25. And then as soon as that starts cooling down, in about 10 minutes is the average time that takes, and we've got our grill ready to sear, we'll gain the last couple of degrees, which will always get us in that 130 to 135 degree Fahrenheit range. If you want more or less, just add a few degrees on either side of that 114 to give you the exact doneness. But the skill that we're really focusing in on here is the notion of carryover cooking or momentum with our food, which is true not only on steak, but anything that we might be cooking, whether it's a large holiday roast, poultry, or something as simple like steak and burgers. This notion of carryover cooking is absolutely true across all varieties of cooks, just at differing degrees of how much temperature we gain or lose. The second aspect of this skill that we're focusing on is changing gears from low and slow to hot and fast. So when we pull our steak off, no matter what doneness temperature that you want, and let it rest, this is where we want to remove our deflector plates, place our grids nice and low so they're sitting right above the coals, open our bottom vent all the way, and open our top vent all the way so the temperature can come up. In about the 10 minutes it takes for our steak to rest, you should be sitting at temperatures in and around 600 to 700 degrees Fahrenheit, which will be perfect for getting a quick sear. If you've never seared over charcoal before, be prepared to move quick. Even something like 30 seconds can be too long before you go from no sear to completely black. So just keep an eye on it, which I often find is easier with the dome open. So while we're cooking the steak and the low slow part with the dome closed, the grilling aspect and searing of it with the dome open will allow you to keep an eye on it, have tongs nearby, and you can just keep flipping and moving your steak around till you develop a great crust. Moving into our intermediate steak, this is going to be very similar, but we're going to solve the changing gears part by removing both heat deflectors and instead go for my second favorite accessory, which is the Kamado Joe soapstone if you have one of these. If you don't have one of these, just skip to our next one if you're looking for a more advanced option. But I call this my double duty soapstone because this is going to serve double duty purpose. It's going to be our heat deflector for the first part of our steak cook, and then it's going to be our sear surface for the last part of our cook. And so the way that I like to do this is set the soapstone up on a cooking grid on the lowest possible position inside of our Kamado Joe. And this is going to be our heat deflector and absorb a ton of energy while we're cooking at the same 250 to 270 degree Fahrenheit. But when we remove everything later on and get ready for our blast sear, we already have the energy in our soapstone needed to get a great sear. So it won't take us long once we open our bottom vent and our top vent all the way in terms of getting an amazing Maillard reaction. Moving right into our advanced version, we're gonna add a couple optional flourishes. And so this is where I love, if you can find some, Costco carries them for half the price of my local barbecue store, but something like a truff hot sauce, adding this as our binder the day before, doing an overnight dry brine is going to make a big difference. But the advanced version here is going to be either a sear sauce, which is real mayonnaise, some red wine vinegar, salt, pepper, and garlic, and then brushing that onto our steak and then getting an amazing sear on each side. This is if you like a more lush flavor on your mouth profile. If you want something with a bit more of a caramel or a nutty finish, this is my favorite, the flambe finish. And so for the flambe finish, I put this in the advanced category because we're running some risk here. So to be safe, do not stand over the fire with an entire bottle of alcohol. You have an explosive meeting a live fire. The way to do this is to have high heat gloves and long sleeves on so there's nothing that can get burned. And then measuring a shot to 2 shots out in your shot glass, we want to pour a little bit starting away from us and move towards us, not the other way around, as we don't want our arm over the flambe once that alcohol combusts and gives us that amazing reaction. And that's why I like to have my soapstone on the back side of the Kamado Joe or on the left or the right so that I can move away and make sure that my hand is nowhere near that fireball when it goes off. But if you're willing to give this a go, amazing results are in store. And full warning here, this will ruin every steak you'll ever eat again at a restaurant, because the flavor from either of these two finishes, along with what you produce inside your Kamado Joe grill, is never going to be replicated at any steak restaurant that you find yourself going to. So tread with caution in terms of, if you like to eat steak out at restaurants, you'll never find them as flavorful again as what you're able to do on cook number 2. So now that you've got 2 cooks under the belt, first starting a hotter faster, we don't have to worry so much about temperature control, and now a 2-stage cook where we start a little bit lower, and even if it creeps up a little bit, that's okay, and finishing with a high heat sear, you're ready for your first low and slow cook. Let's go into cook number 3. So cook number 3 is going to be our first low and slow cook. I put these in this order because on something like a steak, even if you get the temperatures a little bit wrong, starting low and your temperatures climbing, or you don't have the variable of smoking wood is a combustible fuel source, and sometimes it catches flame and your temperatures go way up and you make an adjustment and they go way down. That's why we did the first 2 cooks in that order, to give you a little bit more confidence and skills managing temperatures inside your Kamado. But now I know it, I can see it. You're ready for your first low and slow cook. So I picked pork ribs, as this is a very forgiving cut, and it's also not an all-day ordeal. We're going to be able to do this in 3 to 4 hours, and you're not going to have to manage your fire all day or all night. We're going to get to that a little bit later on in cook number 4 and cook number 5. But for cook number 3, this is our first low and slow cook, and it's also going to be our first opportunity to use some real smoking woods. You're ready for it. I know you can do it. For our good, better, and best variations, I'm going to start you off with our good model, going with a more simple indirect setup. So whether you're using the slow roller, which if you have one, this would be a great time to consider using it, or if you have the heat deflector plates. If you didn't get the slow roller model, this is a Series 1 Big Joe, which does not come with a slow roller. This is a Big Joe Series 3, which does come with a slow roller. I've done side-by-side haste tests, and I'll call them 99.9% identical. I used to use my slow roller all the time, but now that the temperature recommendation has been lowered from 500 to 300, I don't find I'm reaching for it as often. But this is not to say that there are not significant advantages of the slow roller. The main one being that we get our entire grid space is very even temperatures. I've recorded on my Kamado Joe Classic Series 3 using the slow roller a 1 degree Fahrenheit temperature difference between front, back, left, and right. And so if you have something like the Kamado Joe Classic, the slow roller is a great accessory for giving us the entire 18 inches of grid space, which we will need for things like ribs or brisket. If you are using something like what I'm using, the Big Joe, where you have real estate to spare space for days, then grab whatever you're comfortable with. Either one will give you a comparable result. I just wanted to highlight some of the differences in terms of the grid temperatures between the two, particularly on the classic size versus the Big Joe size. So we're gonna set up also at 250 degrees Fahrenheit, which you will achieve by putting your top vent on the control tower top to about 1/8 of an inch inside the first line, and your bottom draft vent down to 1 finger. For the ribs, we're gonna go with some smoke. You can pick anything that you like, but I like to go with cherry wood. Now, when you're shopping for a wood, make sure you look, if you can find it, not kiln dried wood. A lot of the big box stores sell brands like Kingsford or B&B wood chunks which have been kiln dried. These are going to burn very, very easily, but they do not provide as much smoke flavor because the moisture level of that wood has been completely stripped out. If you can find naturally seasoned wood chunks, you will get a lot more flavor and use a lot less smoking wood than you would if you had the kiln dried variations. In either scenario, I like to place the smoking wood at the bottom of the charcoal. This is a tip I originally learned from Harry Sue, who's won multiple Grand National Championships. And I learned over time, there's a few advantages that this does. First, the smoke going through an active fire gets the smoke wood temperature into a more desirable flavor profile range. Smoke burning at 100, 200 degrees Fahrenheit is just smoldering. This is creosote. And wood burning at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit is a wide open bush fire. There's not really any flavor that you would get there, which is why when I used to have my wood-fired pizza oven, if I go for nuclear temperatures, you actually get less flavor at really, really high temperatures than what you get at that 600 to 700 degree Fahrenheit range. And so the same principles apply to our smoking wood here by placing them underneath and having that smoke pass through an active fire. It acts a little bit like a charcoal filter, literally, inside of your grill in terms of giving you the optimal smoking results. Plus, it also solves another problem, which is temperature control. I found if you litter the top of your charcoal basket and lump charcoal with a bunch of wood splits, as they randomly combust during the cook and they start to burn, if they're in wide open flame, you can see your temperatures go way up. And then if you're watching it, you're like, oh no, my temperatures are climbing, I need to adjust my vents. And I make a big adjustment, and now all of a sudden the temperatures go the other way, and we end up in this yo-yo pattern. And so all of those little hassles go away by placing the smoking wood in the bottom. You can get great smoke by placing the wood on the bottom and not have to deal with any of those issues. In terms of cook time, since we're going for a lower and slower temperature, this is going to take about 4 hours, but I would start checking for temperature and tenderness anywhere starting from 3 hours forward. 4 hours is a good general ballpark range for about 250 degrees in a Kamado. And I will say, in a Kamado for a reason. A lot of videos, even popular barbecue joints, you might see Franklin share a video and talk about the 3-2-1 method. This method works amazing on an offset smoker. I know, I have one sitting right over there, but this is not an offset smoker. So applying advice meant for one grill category to a completely different grill category sometimes works amazing, but oftentimes it's completely favoring the strengths of one smoker and not taking into account the strengths and weaknesses of another. And the offset is a convection monster. And by going with 3 hours of smoke, we don't have the conduction energy or the radiant energy that a ceramic Kamado has, and we have way less convection airflow. So by taking something like a 3-2-1, you're going to end up with not great smoke because we're going at very low, slow temperatures and overcooked ribs, which I don't like the end result. So just a short rant on make sure that you apply cooking techniques that work great on the grill that you're cooking on. This is true. If you're following along and you have an offset, thanks for watching. I have plenty of other offset videos for you, but this advice is specifically for the Kamado Grill owners. Moving into intermediate, this is going to go a little bit hotter and faster. I did a side-by-side once. This is how I know the 3-2-1 doesn't work, of doing low and slow ribs beside hot and fast ribs, and the hotter and faster ribs taste better. This was immediately clear to everybody who did the blind taste test, and that's because we're able to burn a cleaner and hotter fire. And so I like to aim 270 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. So to pull this off, our vent setting is going to move 1/8 of an inch the other way. So we're going to go from 1/8 of an inch inside the first line to 1/8 of an inch past the first line for about 270 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And this hotter and faster fire is going to reduce our cook time fairly significantly. We're going to come from almost approaching that 4-hour mark in our first setup to just over 3 hours. Like before, again, you want to check for your doneness. You can check this with a meat probe, but you'll also be able to tell by the bend. If you lift them up with tongs, you want to see them fold over but not break in half. If they're not bending at all, they're undercooked, and if they broke in half the minute that you lift them up, they're overcooked. So just make some adjustments for next time. Moving into my advanced version, this is where we're going to introduce something you'll hear me talk about all the time, which is double indirect. So I mentioned before that the cleaner, hotter fire leads to much better tasting food. And you might be saying, James, that sounds amazing. Why don't we just do this all the time? Well, the downside inside a Kamado style grill of a cleaner, hotter fire means we have more energy below our food, which on longer cooks like a brisket can lead to tearing and drying out and burning the bottom of whatever we're cooking. And so a method and technique that I developed, which is a double indirect method, this involves putting another heat deflector above our bottom heat deflector. So if you put your heat deflectors on the bottom, use the X accessory rack and place maybe a pizza stone, which is going to come in handy if you're doing pizza or things like that in the future anyway, so it's not going to be a single purpose. Or if you happen to have a spare set of deflector plates, those work just as well. But this small little change in setup is not only going to allow you to burn a cleaner and hotter fire and protect the bottom, it gives us way more flavor. I recently did 6 pork shoulders inside my Big Joe Series 1. I started with a full basket, ran at 270, and at the end of that cook, 12 hours later, I burned through all of my fuel. And you might be saying, well, James, that's worse fuel mileage. But in the world of barbecue, fuel is flavor, and a nice clean hot fire is flavor. And using a whole bunch of other tools, whether it be my IR gun to check the surface temperature or infrared cameras, I've been able to see not only a 200 degree Fahrenheit reduction in the conductive energy from the stone sitting below our food, but a much healthier heat signature in terms of making the fire underneath work harder. And this tastes night and day better. And I get comments or emails or messages all the time saying this is the best barbecue I've ever made. So if you want to dive off the deep end, this is a great spot to try it. If you're a little bit uncomfortable and have some questions, I do have a double indirect guide also on my website, which goes through everything from Joe Jr. to Classic to Big Joe Series 1, 2, and 3. All of my learnings and best practices for double indirect on every single grill, including slow roller, heat deflector plates, and everything in between. That's available on the website. It'll show you everything you need to know, along with some tips and tricks and tools to make that even easier. But I just told you what you need to know, which is start with your deflector plates, air gap, and a pizza stone, and you are off to the races for some amazing barbecue. So now that you've got your first low and slow cook in the books, I think you're ready for even more. So for cook number 4, we're gonna do a pulled pork, a smoked pork shoulder, and we're going to increase our time here from that 3 to 4 hour range into the 9 to 12 hour range. This is going to give you an opportunity to master controlling your grill on a much longer cook time, where we start to burn through not only more charcoal, but we run into the problem of, hey James, you said add a couple pieces of smoking wood. There's no way that those last 12 hours. So how do we add more smoke in a Kamado style grill where we've got our grids, our deflector plates, our slow roller, our charcoal basket? This is not very accessible. So what I'm going to introduce here is a hack that I developed a couple years ago, which is using our bottom ash drawer as a smoke wood loading drawer. So whether you're using the stock Kamado Joe ash drawer or using something like the kick ash can, which I'm a big fan of for cleaning out your grill, is I can load wood chips in there and place it in the bottom and take advantage of coals and embers falling down into the basket or your ash drawer and combusting as the cook goes on. And this is a great way to continue to add cooks. The stock Kamado Joe system is easier at doing this, as it's got a handle and a drawer slides right in. If you're using something like the kick ash can, there's a small little air gap below. It's semi-insulated, so things combust really quickly when you add them, but you need some high heat gloves to sort of clear that little 1/4 inch gap that exists to make sure that metal is not expanding, contracting, or putting any pressure on our ceramic components. That's why that's there. But in either case, the ash drawer hack is something that you're going to use in every low and slow cook from this point forward once you try it, because this is how we're going to get more smoke flavor inside of our Kamado style grill. So for our good cook, we're going to stick with a fairly simple setup and go with a regular indirect setup. So again, whether using your slow roller or your heat deflector plates, the only thing that I will add here is the notion of a drip pan. Whether using the slow roller or your deflector plates, something like a pork shoulder or brisket is going to push a lot of fat out, and that fat has nowhere to go but down. That's either going to be on top of your slow roller, on top of your deflector plates, or down into your grill, which can accumulate over time and start to cause bad smoke. And you'll notice this when you go to crank up the temperature for like a pizza, and you need to wait 40 minutes for all that white billowing smoke to clear out. So by putting a drip pan or even just foil underneath the food, we can save significant cleanup energy and effort down the road. So for our good setup, we're gonna set up the same as our ribs. Go for 270 degrees, which is 1/8 of an inch past the first line on the control tower top. Also one finger. Just like before with the ribs, we'll place a couple pieces of smoking wood on the bottom. The only setup change here is the introduction of a drip pan underneath our food, regardless if you're using the slow roller or the heat deflector plates. The ash drawer trick that I mentioned earlier, you can place a couple wood chips and or pellets in the ash drawer, and at 270 degrees that we're running, this will probably take in the 4 to 5 hour mark before your charcoal burns down enough where there's actually active embers falling down in, and that's when they'll start to combust. And every hour to 2 hours, you'll be able to add a couple more wood chips. If you want to get some more smoke, this is going to go into where we left off with the ribs using my double indirect setup. And for all the same reasons, this is going to promote an even harder working fire down below, which just means that we can get to adding wood splits and chunks underneath. And I even say splits and chunks as things like pellets or the wood chips. They will combust immediately and give us almost next to no smoke, since we are raining down hot embers of flavor, if you will, into our ash drawer or our kick ash can. Going for small sort of thumb size to slightly bigger chunks will give us an opportunity for more smoke flavor, and we can increase our intervals of adding wood here. So if we were doing an all-day cook, almost every 2 hours or so would be a great time to check in and see down below how you're doing with your wood supply. And if everything is gone, you can get away with adding a few more wood chips and chunks in there. If you're not getting them to combust, keep in mind I'm mentioning here I'm using a charcoal basket. If you don't have one in your grill, like my Series 1 grills, Big Joe, Joe Jr., and Classic Joe, check out something even like Kick Ash Basket. I mentioned the Kick Ash can earlier. These are a great combination, particularly in the Joe Jr., so we can remove our heat source. But the reason I'm on about this is they have a larger gap that allows those coals and embers to fall down into either your can or your ash drawer in order to combust those. The other thing that may prevent that is if you overfill your charcoal, and we're like a massive heaping mound and our fire is sitting up on top, and the next day when everything's cool, you open it up, it still looks like you have a full charcoal basket, this is too much fuel in order to get those coals and embers falling down. So try a little bit less next time and you'll be off to the races. Last but not least in our pulled pork is adding something like the notion of cold smoke. So our first one was indirect 270, next one was double indirect 270. We're not going to change our temperature here. 270 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit is exactly what we want, but this is for the smoke enthusiasts. I recently discovered this. In fact, I actually don't know if I've got the video scheduled in opposite order. It may not be out by the time that this one comes out, but borrowing from Bar A Barbecue, they've shared many times in print as well as in interviews, they do this notion of a cold smoke before they cook. Now, I'm not normally a fan of a pellet tube smoker inside of your Kamado style grill. There's just not enough air. So if we have a pellet tube struggling to get air and your cooking fire struggling to get air, often the pellet tube smoke is so thick that it puts out our active fire and then we get into temperature control problems. So even though these work amazing in pellet grills or propane grills or even offsets or anything else that you want to add a pellet tube smoker for, the one place they don't work great is inside your Kamado when you're trying to maintain a cooking temperature. But they work fantastic for cold smoke. So for our advanced version, what we're going to do is add in a cold smoke session for about 2 hours before we start cooking, and then cook just like we left off with our intermediate double indirect setup in order to get even more smoke. And if I show you an example here of 6 pork shoulders that I did recently for a church event, these look like they came out of my offset. The bark and the smoke flavor on these was absolutely fantastic. So here we are, cook number 5. You're almost ready to graduate. In fact, I think you're ready to graduate because cook number 5 is brisket. So I'm going to give you a couple options, but more condensed since everything is building on the skills that we've already covered. So the easy version would just, again, keep it simple. Go with an indirect smoke, just like we did with our ribs, just like we did with our pulled pork at 270 degrees using our heat deflectors and or slow roller along with a drip pan. The only difference between these two cooks is that the average cook time for a single pork shoulder inside a classic or a Big Joe is about 9 hours and 20 minutes, whereas the average cook time, depending on the size of the brisket that you pick up, is often a couple hours longer. But everything else is going to be very similar to what we just covered before. So what are our 3 versions then for brisket? So versions 1 and 2 are actually going to be identical to what we just went through on cook number 4 with our pulled pork, everything from temperatures to smoking wood to drip pans. So I'm not going to repeat all that. Instead, I'm going to introduce a new skill that is going to also come in very handy as you now are graduated and ready to go into the wild and tackle anything else. And so there's 2 skills that I'm going to introduce on brisket. So the first one that is in my Brisket 101 video is the notion of injecting some tallow into the flat. I like to buy my briskets. I get a great deal at Costco, but these are choice grade where I am prime is not an option. So by going with a choice grade brisket, I get amazing results by trimming some of that fat and rendering it down into tallow. Now you can do this the day in advance, render that tallow, add in 2 cups of water, smoke it till the water is completely evaporated, strain off the chunks of meat and or anything that remains. And now you're ready to get some nice smoked tallow that you can inject back into your brisket. This makes a world of difference and gives some amazing flavor, but also make sure that our brisket is tender, juicy, and full of flavor. The second new skill that I'll introduce here is the long hot hold. And so if you've not heard of this, this is where we're going to cook the day before, planning to serve something the next day. And so there's a couple reasons you might want to do this. First, depending on the time that people are coming. If you have people coming for lunch, unless you want to be up all night, cooking a brisket same day isn't possible. And so logistics is a big part of it. This is why many of the top Texas barbecue joints are actually cooking their food all in advance, as they have people showing up early in the morning, lining up, and you just cannot have briskets ready to go hot off the grill. And while I don't believe the long hot hold actually makes the food better, it does make it much easier. So I'm going to use a golfing analogy here. If you don't golf, maybe try it, use your imagination. But imagine chipping on to the world's largest green. All you have to do is get the ball to land on the green. If you have a big surface area, this is much easier to do than if you're trying to land in a little island in the middle of a lake. If you had a really, really small green in a very hard to reach place, that is infinitely more difficult. And brisket finishing temperatures are a little bit like these two extremes. I found in my experience now over 2 decades and hundreds of briskets that the proper finishing temperature comes down to a feel that you're just not going to have the first time that you go at it. And so while you're learning what to look for in your feel, that's why I love this notion of the hot hold, is it's going to completely remove the guesswork. The knife's edge that you have to work with is about 30 minutes from an undercooked brisket to an overcooked brisket. And if you're trying to cook your brisket to the exact right spot and pull it, this is where people get the results that they're not completely happy with. And so by going with the long hot hold, the way to do this is to pull our brisket just before it's done being completely cooked. So about 195 degrees Fahrenheit versus what might be probing in the 197 to 211. You said, James, I heard I should cook my brisket to 203. No brisket is the same. I've had briskets completely probe tender, where if we were dropping in something like an instant read meat thermometer and getting the feel of room temperature butter or peanut butter, where it just almost wants to fall right through the brisket itself, that's happened anywhere from 197 all the way up to 212. And so by really focusing on a specific number, you may miss the perfect tenderness window. So by going for a long hot hold at 195, that's going to be below all of them. What you're going to want to do here is let your brisket rest right out of coming out of the cooker for about 30 minutes, just to make sure that we don't have any carryover cooking, and then adjust your oven to 150, 155 degrees Fahrenheit. On my particular oven, the minimum is 170 degrees Fahrenheit, and I can override the temperature in order to bring it down into that 150. Just go ahead and use some probes to calibrate this and make sure that your brisket is staying above that 145 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit is a great range. Anything lower than that, we start to get in the risk of bacteria growing. So use some probes the first time that you do this until you learn about your particular oven. But this notion of a hot hold is going to open up a world of options. So whether it's a party and you want to cook more things from a brisket, this would allow you to do the brisket a day ahead of time, hot hold it, and then get to cooking burgers or sausages or chicken or whatever you might be, and you can get more cooks out of one grill. And or you want to take food to another place and meet friends and family at a different location, the hot hold will be your friend. Well, let me be the first to congratulate you for completing the 5-class masterclass of going from a complete novice to an absolute pro on your Kamado style grill. I hope that you'll come back after this video and check out some other tips, techniques, and tricks that I have all focused on getting more out of your Kamado style grill, along with other popular smokers and grills. Please hit the like and subscribe button to be alerted of future videos. And if you've got any questions, I do a monthly members live where I go live and you can ask me any question that's on your mind, whether it's this video or any other, and get the answer straight from the horse's mouth rather than waiting for these pre-recorded videos. That's it for today. But before I let you go, I did promise at the beginning to give you a sneak peek of a video that I'm working on for later this summer, which is the rotisserie rib carousel made by Only Fire. The reason I have this is I did a direct ribs a year ago and I absolutely loved the flavor that I get from cooking directly over our coals. The downside is I can only fit a single rack, and so today I am on the quest to find out if this accessory is the must-have accessory of 2024, and I've got 3 racks of baby back ribs smoking along on my Big Joe Series 1. That's it for today though. I'm James from Smoky Dad Barbecue signing off. Remember, don't be afraid to fire it up.